welcome to the Prdx Church Podcast, the TPC podcast, I should say. I'm your host, James Lapine, and I'm here with Jessica Dinsmore, who oversees our Prdx Village ministry, which deals with trauma care, which deals with any sort of abuse or trauma that children are experiencing in our church. And so I'm glad she's here with us. We're going to talk with her in just a minute, but I wanted to welcome you back to the podcast. You know, we were doing live shows for a while, doing those weekly, doing them on Facebook and YouTube, and that was a lot of fun, but we are transitioning back to audio only, and again, we'll do at least monthly on these. But what I'd like to do over the rest of the year is just be highlighting ministries and lay ministry leaders and some of the great work that is happening in our church, so that hopefully as you hear about it, you'll be inspired at least to pray for our leaders, but maybe also for some of the people that I talk to, you will say, I want to get involved with that. And so if that's the case with today's show, you can email me, james@theprdxchurch.com, and we would love to help you get connected in serving in this way. But let's go ahead and jump into our talk with Jessica. Let's get into the show. Hey, Jess. Do you want me to call you Jess?
Most of my friends call me Jess. You can call me Jess.
I'll call you Jess.
Okay.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks, James. I'm really grateful to be here.
I'm glad you're here. It took us, I'll just admit, it took us 45 minutes to get this thing set up, but I missed Tyser. Like I said, when I was doing the live podcast, he just set everything up for me, and all I did was walk in and start gabbing, but we got it figured out.
Yep.
The help of Jordan Schneider and others. And so we're here now. How you doing?
I'm good.
Are you?
Yes, I am. It's nice to be around people up here at the offices.
Right. You are a speech pathologist.
I am, yeah, with the public schools.
And so when everything started shutting down, how did that change your world?
Oh, it changed everything.
Yes.
It went from in-person therapy, getting to be at school with the kids, to everything online.
Yes.
And I work at a Title I school in Fort Worth.
Okay.
And so even just looking at access to internet, access to devices to be able to engage in therapy in school, there was just a really big learning curve. But in the midst of it all, there were also so many encouraging aspects, getting to build relationships with parents and to get to see kids in their, just inside their homes on a daily basis. There were definitely aspects that were unexpected.
Yes, I can imagine. For listeners who don't know, or maybe it's just me who doesn't know, but what is a Title I school?
So a Title I school is within the public school system,
Okay.
and it's just deciphered based off of a lower socioeconomic status.
Gotcha.
And so the schools receive extra funding
Okay.
for specific areas.
So while students might have technology at school or have the things that they need at school, if they're at home, maybe they don't have access to that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's tough. So you shut down. Did you stick around here?
I didn't. I was in California.
Okay.
I went home for 7 days for spring break, which
Okay.
turned into 2.5 months.
No way. Oh my gosh. So did things shut down during spring break?
They did. It was
Okay.
the Friday of spring break. Everything just closed down. And so
gosh.
that was also a blessing, though, for me and my family. I got, I don't know the last time I got 2.5 months of uninterrupted time with my family.
High school?
Yeah, but even
Summer?
you got extracurriculars.
Right. Okay, so did you grow up in California?
I did.
Okay, what part?
Yes, Orange County.
Yeah, nice. I've heard of it.
It is nice. It is very pretty.
How'd you get here?
I came to TCU for
Okay.
undergrad, and I kept saying, I'll go back after undergrad. And then I went to grad school here. I'll go back after grad school. And it's just, Fort Worth is a special place,
Yeah.
and it's kept me here, and I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Why did you choose TCU?
I knew I wanted to study speech therapy,
Okay.
and that's not one of the more common majors, and so it limited my search. And when we came to visit, my mom and I both just recognized that there was something unique about Fort Worth. And I think to this day, 7-8 years later, that's continued to be true.
Yeah. Yep. I felt a similar thing. When I came last July and interviewed, I thought, this is a special place.
It is.
So why speech therapy?
Good question. I knew I wanted to work with children.
Okay.
And
You just like it?
I love them.
Okay.
They're so fun.
Okay. God bless you.
And I knew I wanted to be in a field where I could interact with families, like whole family units, and it just kind of fit. It worked. I love communicating. I think just giving a child a voice is something that I've just loved since I was little, and getting to watch kids develop in their communication skills. And so it just kind of was a really good match, and it's been fun.
That's great. What about Prdx? How'd you find Prdx?
Prdx, I came to the Prdx in 2016.
Okay.
And when I was deciding, I was praying through different churches, and I really wanted to go to a church that was just willing to engage in hard conversations, was having hard conversations about the orphan in Fort Worth, specifically vulnerable children was what I was praying through. And Ryan Keeney, I saw a Facebook video of him sharing his heart for adoption and the vulnerable child, and I was like, well, there it is. I'm going to Prdx. And my first Sunday here was actually Ryan's last Sunday.
Oh, no.
They were commissioning him to plant Grace, which was funny timing, but...
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But you stuck around anyway.
I stuck around.
Yes. Okay, cool. So you have this heart for children, for giving them a voice, and then did you immediately get involved with family ministry here?
I did pretty quickly got involved in the orphan care ministry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so tell us about that, because I don't think everybody knows what we do in terms of orphan care.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The orphan care ministry is here to serve families who are interested in adopting. Within even the word adoption, there's so many different facets to that, whether it's international adoption or domestic adoption, families interested in foster care. So the ministry's here to provide just a consistent support for families, to answer questions, to just help build a community around families at the Prdx.
Okay. So you get started there and do that for a couple years.
I did.
And then it blossoms into this new thing that we're calling Prdx Village.
Yes,
So
we are.
tell me about that.
Yeah, so when praying through Prdx Village, kind of a few of us at the church were just looking at this group of vulnerable children. And vulnerable children doesn't just mean children who have been abused. Later on, I think we'll probably talk about what is this word trauma that so many people are talking about in society right now. But really, we just saw a gap of care. Like, we have these families who are in tough spots. Their kids have behaviors that don't make sense to them. And they're just struggling. They're really struggling. And we just saw that there was a gap in care in responding to those needs. And a group of us were like, the church can be the answer to this. Like, let's step in. Let's explore what this looks like to equip our church and then to tangibly care for families who are just in tough spots.
So what, to that end, what have we, I think we've gotten started. Yes?
Yes, we have gotten started.
What sort of practical, tangible things are we able to do for families who find themselves in that situation?
That's a great question. So at Prdx Village, we are kind of building this ministry off of 3 different platforms, I guess.
Okay.
So one of our hopes is to equip the church in just a knowledge and an understanding of what is trauma. Because I think sometimes if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to engage with trauma.
Yeah.
So equipping the church is a big thing. And then we also are launching a book study.
Okay.
And so the hope with this book study is that, you're getting to sit around a table with people. You're getting to engage in content and dialogue and learn about trauma and how it's maybe affecting each family individually. And in that moment, as you're learning and growing, you're getting to look up and see everybody else around the table with you and hopefully realize that, I'm not in this alone. Like, I have the body of Christ around me in this. And then another thing that we want to do that definitely has just been paused with COVID are connection home visits.
Okay.
And so this would be, a family saying, like, we're just really struggling getting out of the house. Like, it's really hard just to get out of the house, for example.
Yeah.
Or like, my kiddo's not using their words to communicate. I don't know how to care for them. we want to be able to like go into families' homes and provide just care in the middle of it. Like we want to fight genuinely alongside families, because I think sometimes it can be really easy as an outsider to be like, oh, you could go try this. But then it's, maybe on the parents' end, they're like, I don't have capacity to go try that on my own. Yep. And so we want to be just entering into families' homes with them and providing just that tangible support.
Yeah, that's great. I think, or you get, sometimes when people tell you, just try this, you try it, but you kind of need somebody there to help you as you're trying it, right?
Exactly.
Maybe you don't know how to do it all on your own. So that's amazing. So equip us, because you're right. Trauma is a word that I think the usage of it is increasing, but the definition of it feels fluid.
Right.
So give it some edges for us.
Absolutely. So another thing that I did want to say is I am a trust-based relational intervention TBRI practitioner.
Whoa.
And that is also just, I feel like how I have been able to gain knowledge and understanding is through this training. And basically,
how do you get that training? Is that a graduate thing?
So part of it started with TCU, and I took some classes and just was like, this is good stuff. I want to know more. And so I was able to go through like their actual like practitioner training.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And so TBRI is something that we are going to be using that a lot throughout Prdx Village.
Okay.
And it's an attachment-based, just holistic approach to caring for children who've experienced trauma.
Okay.
And the foundation of it is based on 3 harmonious principles: connection, empowering, and correction.
Okay.
And the woman who created TBRI based her principles off of the gospel.
Cool.
And so it's just been really cool to dive into that and look and see, like, where is Jesus in this intervention?
Yes.
And even those 3 principles, like, because of Jesus, we have connection with him. We have a relationship. He empowers us with his Holy Spirit. And as a loving father, he corrects us. He sanctifies us. And so with all that being said, TBRI has a definition of trauma that they use that we are adopting within Prdx Village. And so they identify 5 risk factors. And I love the language that they use with that, because they're not saying these are 5 things that if they happen to your child is going to result in X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
And so I do want to be clear with that and say, we're not saying that if your child has experienced this, that they are going to have challenging behaviors and that it's going to be unmanageable.
Yeah.
These are just risk factors that I think would benefit all of us to be aware of.
Okay, so if I'm a parent listening right now,
yes,
and one of these 5 things has happened in our home, it doesn't necessarily mean that my child has experienced trauma.
Right, exactly.
It means that you need to pay attention to it, and it matters, and it could have an adverse effect.
Yeah.
But it's not a one-to-one.
Yeah.
If this happens, it equals trauma.
Exactly,
Okay.
yes. Thank you for providing that clarification. So the 5 risk factors are a mom who has experienced a difficult pregnancy, maybe a stressful pregnancy, a mom who experienced a difficult birth, so something traumatic happening during birth, a child who's experienced early hospitalization, a child who's experienced abuse, and within abuse there's different types. So there's physical abuse, medical abuse, emotional abuse, or sexual abuse.
Can I ask you medical abuse? I'm familiar with the other ones.
Yeah.
What's medical abuse?
That's a great question. So medical abuse would be a child has been diagnosed with something, maybe diabetes, for example, and they need insulin. And a parent is refusing to provide that for the child.
Okay. Not giving them what they need medically.
Right.
Okay.
Child neglect, and so that is failing to provide basic needs. That could be emotional needs or physical needs, just like clothes or hygiene. And then there is this vague category of other trauma, and so that could just be adverse childhood experiences, such as living with a parent who suffers from substance abuse or a mental illness. So those are the 5 risk factors that TBRI has identified through research. Like you said, just to be aware of. And, with that awareness, now, like, there's hope, there is support, and there are next steps in terms of getting to provide that care.
Got it. Okay. And so how do we, I think I understand what the mission of this ministry is. I now understand some of the risk factors contributing to trauma. And maybe this is still in process, or maybe you're still figuring this out. How do we go from there to, this is an at-risk family or an at-risk child? How do we identify that?
Yeah, I think that's going to be like a really fluid process.
Okay.
Because I think I could see it playing out like, let's say we have a family at the Prdx who has a passion for foster care and they want to foster school-age children. Well, we know if they are in foster care that they have experienced some type of trauma. And so maybe Prdx Village gets to be proactive with families and gets to come and support the parents before the kids are even there. Or, maybe on a Sunday, we're just noticing that, hey, this kiddo is just really struggling in the classroom. There's something that's just different about his or her behaviors. Like, let's just have a conversation. Let's just start talking. And I think that's a big thing with Prdx Village is we want all of this to be taking place in the context of relationship.
Right.
And so in the context of relationship and conversation, we can gauge how we can best care for families.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense that there maybe wouldn't be a systematized way for it to happen, that it would need to happen kind of fluidly, like you said, in relationship. Because that's how anything else would happen.
Right.
That is in relationship, is you would just pick up on that because you know that person. This is, I hate that I even have to bring this up, but being in the middle of this global pandemic, with people being sheltered in place, we've unfortunately heard increasing stories of child abuse happening in the home. And so can you, as part of your mission is to equip us, will you equip us on what it means to report child abuse, how to do that, and when to do it, and all that kind of stuff? Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So it's been interesting looking at just the impact of this pandemic on families. And a lot of it, are predictions. I'm not saying that these things are absolutely true. And in that context, too, I want to say that even preparing for this podcast, I got to learn more. And so my hope is just that this is the start to a greater conversation at the Prdx, and that we can continue to learn and grow together in how to best care for vulnerable children behind closed doors. But so some things that CPS, through talking to people at CPS, which is actually one of our village volunteers, and so that's been she's been an incredible resource for us just to get to learn, what's going on and how can we engage. And then some articles from Cook Children's. They have seen that during seasons of stress, so during the 2008-2009 recession, or during the holidays, they just see an increase in child abuse. Families are just on edge. There's just a lot of stress happening behind closed doors, which can at times lead to the increase in child abuse. They also see at times an increase in child abuse reports in the fall when children go back to school. Because, they've been home all summer. Maybe they didn't have anybody. They were only interacting with people in the home, and they didn't have anybody to make the outcry to, or, people didn't notice. And so thinking about kids being home for an even longer amount of time because of the pandemic, there are some predictions that it is possible the number of reports will increase when children go back to school in the fall. So when that does happen, we all have a role in that. In Texas, we are all mandated reporters, which just means that if we have any suspicion that a child has been abused or neglected, so that's not confirmed, that's not saying like, I've asked all the questions and I know that this has happened. It's just any suspicion, our response should be to make a report. And how
do we do that?
So there's two options to doing that. So you can either do it online or you can call in. And the number is 1-800-252-5400. And that is within the Department of Family and Protective Services. And so that is our connection to Child Protective Services.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So they're different agencies. Or you report to one and another
They're
one follows
connected.
up. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, okay. Okay, so there's a phone number, there's a website, there's a way to do it there.
Is, yes.
Okay, and we can maybe link to that in our show notes too to help people out with that. But that's important to know that we are mandatory reporters on that.
Right. And I think there are a few just myths about CPS. I think sometimes people hear the word CPS and they think, oh, the people who take kids away from their families.
Right.
And I do just want to take this time to say that is not the mission of CPS. The only time they take children out of the home is if the child's life is at an immediate risk or danger. And so the hope is that they can go into the home and, maybe the report was made because the child just was really dirty and people were just noticing that they were coming to school with the same clothes on every day. And they can go into the home and say, hey, we are going to connect you to resources. We're going to make a family plan. I'm going to check back in with you. And so the hope is that, kids are being cared for and that families are being connected to resources that we have in Fort Worth that they might just not know about.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, removing the child from the home would be sort of a last resort type thing, right?
Yeah, it definitely is.
And that's just worst case scenarios, but there's a lot of support before that.
Yes.
That's great. What am I not asking you about that you want to talk about?
So I was thinking, I do want to just talk about within CPS and making this report, that the pressure is not on us to find out every detail, to ask questions, because really if a child has been through something traumatic, our hope would be that they haven't been through that, but if they have, that they would only have to relive it one time.
Yeah.
And they would only have to relive it when the investigator is asking questions. And so that we can kind of take the pressure off of us to ask more questions, but just hear the child, believe the child, make the report, and then allow the investigators to kind of follow up in what they have been trained in. Right.
So we're not the investigators. Right. We don't have to do the due diligence. We don't have to verify all the facts. We just have to make the report so that somebody else can do that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I do want to just touch on the fears that are associated with making this report.
Good, yeah.
And just say that, at Prdx and within Prdx Village, we want to be here to walk through this with you while honoring confidentiality for families. But I think there's just a lot of fear. There's fear that the system will fail and that it won't be handled well.
Yep.
I think there's fear that the report that you made was maybe a misunderstanding and the situation wasn't true. I mean, fear that you're going to lose trust with whoever you're reporting.
Yeah.
But I think within that fear, if we look at the Lord who we worship and we look at his heart for justice and we look at his heart for his children, I hope that we can place our hope in the Lord and not in maybe the inconsistencies that we could see within the system.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it does feel like a better safe than sorry kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
If there are warning signs there, you may as well find out if those warning signs are legit or if they're not. And if they're not, okay.
Right.
You missed it and not the end of the world, but you'd rather know than not know.
Definitely.
Yeah. Man, I'm grateful for the work that y'all are doing. And I'm excited to see how this, I'm excited that we will have lots of people doing important work. I'm not excited that you have to do the work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because it's out there, it needs to be addressed. And like you said, we can be the hands and feet of Jesus to get it started, and maybe to even model for our government or for our city what it looks like to take the first step here and to do it well. And I know that you have a heart for that as well. Just not just having our own siloed thing, but working with secular organizations, coming alongside them, helping them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I love the most about the Prdx Church is just that we are not afraid to join arms with nonprofits, with secular organizations, with governments, with schools, with whoever. We're here to be a blessing to the city.
Yeah.
We're here. If our goal, one of our goals, is that if we were to no longer exist, Fort Worth would say, "Man, remember when the Paradox Church was around? Remember how helpful that was?
Yeah.
And I think some days we're better at that than others, but I think this ministry is another great step in that direction. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a team. It is absolutely not just me.
What else? Anything else?
There was one other thing that
Okay.
I was thinking about, especially just looking at, today it's June 4th.
Yes.
And as we're recording this.
Yep.
And, on Wednesday, we were, every day we've been having protests.
Yeah.
And I've just been thinking and praying and talking with people. And I was thinking about just TBRI. We have this holistic intervention that our hope is not in. Our hope is in the gospel. But we are seeing how TBRI can be a tool to engage in conversations. And I was just thinking back to Wednesday when people were protesting at the courthouse, and it was after curfew, and the police were there, and it was kind of this moment of like, what's going to happen?
Right.
And the protesters said, we'll leave if you guys back up. And also, please correct me if my interpretation of that night is not correct. I would love to grow in that too. But looking at the response, I think law enforcement had a choice. They had a choice if they were going to share power. And that's another thing that TBRI looks at, is sharing power.
Yep.
And they chose to share power, and they chose to get on their level. They knelt and they prayed, and they entered into anger with gentleness and respect. And entering into that doesn't mean diminishing it. It doesn't mean saying stop. It doesn't mean saying that doesn't exist. But like, they engaged in the anger with gentleness and respect. And that was just so hopeful for me, and looking at things that we hope to practice within Paradox Village, and looking at that parallel. And so I did want to take just a moment to connect those two, because I think I don't want to disregard what our community is talking about right now. And I know that I'm here talking about a different topic, but I do think that we can talk about them both at the same time.
For sure. I see the connection there in what you're talking about, and that was a beautiful moment. I was sitting at home, seeing it on Twitter, watching it unfold, and just crying.
Yeah.
And it inspired me to get out the next day and march for a little while, and be with the people. And I love what you're saying about entering into the anger with gentleness and sharing power.
Yeah.
And I think it's very disarming for people, right? Whether you're a protester downtown or you're a child throwing a temper tantrum at home. And so I am all about us modeling that however we can.
Yeah.
Just kind of the shalom, the peace of Jesus that we have.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And so that's beautiful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I keep saying, is there anything else? And then you just keep having great stuff. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
No, I'm just grateful. I'm so thankful, again, just to get to be at a church who says, like, let's talk. Let's enter into hard conversations.
Yep.
And so I really appreciate you
Absolutely.
having Paradox Village on the podcast.
Yes, yeah. Well, we don't have to be afraid of them. We don't have to be afraid of hard conversations, because we have all our answers in Jesus. And so happy to do it, and grateful for you. And I don't know who will be on next week or next month. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't have a plan beyond this podcast. I knew I was having Jess on today, and then we'll figure out the schedule moving forward. But if you want to speak into that, I know I do have some podcast ideas from some of you on the back burner. So I'm gonna readdress those next week, and I'm gonna cipher through those and maybe pick one of those. But my inbox is always open, james@theparadoxchurch.com. Would love to hear from you. I hope this has been helpful. And again, if you want to get involved, you can email me. Can they email you? You want them to just email me, and I'll forward it to you.
That sounds great.
Okay. Email me, and I'll forward you over to Jess, and you can get involved with Paradox Village. If what we've talked about today has impacted you, if you felt maybe the Spirit moving in you to get more involved, we'd love for that to happen. And at the very least, you can be praying for children experiencing trauma. You can be praying that will be found out, and then that we'll be able to help address it and offer help and hope to them. And that will do it for this episode of the TPC podcast. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you all soon.